The wind howled across the vast, open plains of Wyoming, carrying dust and the smell of earth. At the edge of the world, where the horizon stretched endlessly, stood a weather-beaten ranch. It was a place where the land and sky met in a harsh, unforgiving embrace, and the only sound was the rustling of the tall grass and the creaking of the old barn. This was the home of Graham Westbrook, a man in his late 30s who had lived more years than he cared to count in the rough silence of the Wyoming Territory. His face was hardened by the sun and wind, his hands calloused from years of working the land. But it was the emptiness in his eyes that told the true story of his life, one defined by loss and solitude. A year had passed since his wife, Evelyn, had died. The illness had taken her quickly, like a thief in the night, leaving Graham to face a world that seemed far too big and cold for one man to navigate alone. The memories of Evelyn still lingered in every corner of the ranch. Her soft voice, her smile, the way she would hum while she worked in the kitchen. But all of that was gone now. The house felt quieter than it ever had before, and Graham found himself waking up to the same silence every day. His once lively ranch, filled with the sound of her laughter and the clink of dishes, now stood still, like a shadow of its former self. As he moved through the empty rooms of the house, Graham often found himself talking to Evelyn as though she were still there. He'd call her name, asking her thoughts on the weather, or how he should fix the broken fence out back, but there was no reply. Only the echo of his own voice. There was no one to talk to, no one to share the burden of the ranch with him. The animals, the horses, the cattle, those were his only companions now. He had built walls around himself, not just on the ranch, but in his heart. He refused to let anyone in, not after Evelyn. He couldn't bear the thought of losing someone else. But beneath that thick layer of grief, something stirred inside him, a restless feeling that he couldn't ignore. It wasn't just the cold, empty nights or the endless days of hard work that made him feel uneasy. It was something deeper, something that called to him like a whisper on the wind. Perhaps there was more to his life than just this endless cycle of labor and loneliness. Maybe, just maybe, the world had something in store for him, but he didn't know how to reach for it. Not yet. Graham kept himself busy. He worked the land, repaired fences, fed the animals, and did whatever needed to be done. But even in all that work, there was no escape from the weight on his chest. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and in the silence of the dark, he would hear Evelyn's voice. It was as though she were still there, telling him that everything would be okay, that he didn't have to be alone. But those were just memories, fading away with each passing day. And yet, in his heart, he clung to them. He wasn't ready to let go of her, not yet. The ranch was his life, but it was also his prison. He had been surrounded by people once, back when he and Evelyn had dreamt of a family together. They had talked about the future, about raising children, building a home, growing old together. But those dreams had died with her. And now, Graham had no use for dreams anymore. He simply wanted to survive, to get through each day without drowning in the pain that seemed to follow him like a shadow. As the months passed, Graham's grief became a part of him, like the land itself. He didn't expect anyone to understand. People from town would occasionally come by to offer their condolences, but he pushed them away. He didn't need pity, and he didn't need help. He had made his peace with the fact that he was alone, and he was content to keep it that way. But in the quiet of the ranch, in the long, lonely nights, a part of him still wondered if he was fooling himself. Could he ever be happy again? Could he ever let go of the past and move forward? It was a question that had no answer, at least not yet. And as the wind howled through the empty halls of the house, Graham couldn't help but feel that the world was waiting for something. Something that would change his life forever. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the vast ranch, Graham stood in the doorway of his home, a tired figure etched against the fading light. The wind whistled through the open plains, carrying with it the quiet hum of the earth. He had spent the entire day repairing fences, tending to the animals, and trying to ignore the emptiness that had become his constant companion. The silence of the ranch had a weight to it, a presence that seemed to settle into his bones. Graham had grown accustomed to it, but that evening something felt different, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The knock on the door was unexpected, sharp against the stillness. Graham looked up, surprised. Visitors were rare in these parts, and he couldn't imagine who would be calling at this hour. As he walked to the door, his boots scraping against the wooden floor, he wondered if it was someone from town coming to offer their condolences again. But when he opened the door, it was not a familiar face that greeted him. Standing on the threshold was a woman, her face lined with age, but her eyes sharp, full of a knowing sadness. In her arms, she cradled a small bundle wrapped tightly in a worn blanket. The sight of her was unsettling, as if she had stepped out of some forgotten part of his life. Her presence was foreign, but there was something about her that felt strangely familiar. Without waiting for Graham to speak, she stepped forward and said softly, "Your wife told me to deliver this." Graham's heart skipped a beat, his mind grinding to a halt. He stared at her, unable to comprehend the words. His chest tightened as he struggled to breathe. His eyes flickered to the small bundle in her arms, and for a moment, everything seemed to fade. The ranch, the wind, the past, it all disappeared. There was only the woman in front of him, holding something that had no place in his world. "Your wife told me to deliver this," she repeated, her voice gentle but firm. Her eyes softened as she met Graham's gaze, and she offered him the bundle. "This is your daughter." Graham's hands shook as he reached out to take the baby from her. The weight of the child, so light yet so heavy in his arms, sent a shock through him. His body froze, 1,000 thoughts racing through his mind, none of them making any sense. His mouth went dry, and he couldn't find the words to respond. The world around him felt like it was spinning, but he was anchored to the spot, his heart pounding in his chest. "Before Evelyn passed," Marianne continued, her voice steady but laced with sadness, "she asked me to bring this child to you. She wanted you to have her. She wanted you to be her father." The words landed with a thud in Graham's chest. His mind reeled, trying to catch up with what was happening. Evelyn had been gone for a year now, and yet here was this child, a daughter, their daughter, the child they had dreamed of but never had the chance to raise. How could this be? Why had Evelyn kept this from him? Why hadn't she told him? His mind raced with questions, but none of them could find their way out of his mouth. He looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby's eyes were dark, large, and full of an inexplicable wisdom, as if she had already seen the world in ways he couldn't understand. She looked so much like Evelyn, the same dark hair, the same soft features. The resemblance was uncanny, and for a moment, Graham felt as though he were looking into a mirror of his past, staring at a version of the woman he had loved and lost. His throat tightened. He had imagined many things in the years since Evelyn's death, but this was beyond anything he could have ever expected. The grief he had buried so deep inside him suddenly rushed to the surface, and he felt himself choking on it. The tears he had held back for so long threatened to break free, but he didn't know how to let them fall. He wasn't ready for this. He hadn't been prepared to be a father. He wasn't ready to open his heart again, especially not after everything he had already lost. The baby made a soft noise in his arms, a quiet, almost imperceptible sound, and Graham looked down at her, his chest tightening even more. What was he supposed to do with this child? He had no idea how to be a father. He didn't even know how to take care of himself, let alone a tiny baby who needed everything from him. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, and for a moment, he wished he could just walk away from it all. Leave the ranch, leave the baby, leave everything behind. But there was something about the child, something in the way she looked at him, that made it impossible to turn away. He couldn't explain it, but he knew, deep down, that he couldn't just walk away. Evelyn's memory, her voice, the life they had once dreamed of. It all seemed to hang in the air between them, urging him to accept this unexpected gift, this new beginning, however impossible it seemed. "Her name is Lily," Marianne said, breaking through Graham's thoughts. "Evelyn wanted her to have her name. She wanted you to raise her. She said it was meant to be." Graham nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure he could trust his own mind. This was too much. The baby, the message, the memories of Evelyn, they were all swirling together, leaving him disoriented and unsure. But as he looked at Lily, he felt a stir inside him, a deep, unnameable feeling. It was a flicker of something that could grow into hope or love, or maybe just a need to protect her. It was the smallest of sparks, but it was enough to make him take a tentative step forward. Marian didn't say much more. She simply offered him a gentle smile before turning to leave. "I'll be nearby if you need me," she said quietly, before walking back into the twilight, disappearing into the distance. Graham stood there in the doorway, the wind tugging at his clothes, feeling a strange mixture of awe and fear. He looked down at Lily once more. Her tiny face, still wrapped in the warmth of the blanket, seemed so peaceful, so innocent. She had no idea of the storm that had just entered her life. She had no idea of the grief that still lingered in the corners of Graham's heart, or the confusion that clouded his thoughts. And yet, in that moment, something inside Graham began to change. A part of him wanted to pull back, to push the baby away and retreat into the solitude he knew so well. But another part of him, the part that still remembered Evelyn's warmth, her laughter, the life they had dreamed of, began to rise up. This was not a mistake. This was the beginning of something new, something that might bring light back into his life, something that might heal the wounds he had long kept hidden. He took a deep breath, his chest tight, and looked out into the fading light. For the first time in a long while, Graham didn't feel quite so alone. Graham stood in the doorway, the baby in his arms, staring at her with a mix of disbelief and fear. Lily, so small, so fragile, felt like a weight that he wasn't sure he could carry. The soft sounds of her crying filled the space around him. But in that moment, he was frozen. He hadn't wanted this. He hadn't wanted any of it. His life, his ranch, had always been enough for him, and he never once imagined a child would become part of it. Especially not now. Not after Evelyn. For a long time, Graham had buried the idea of children deep inside him. He and Evelyn had dreamed of a family once, back when the future seemed bright and full of possibilities. But after losing her, those dreams were shattered. He couldn't even bring himself to think of children anymore. The thought of raising a baby, of taking on the role of father, was impossible. It felt like an impossible weight on his chest, like something that might break him. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Lily was a reminder of everything he had lost, everything that had been ripped away from him. He could almost hear Evelyn's voice in his head, asking him to take care of their daughter. But he didn't know how. He wasn't ready for this. He didn't know how to be a father, how to give love and care to a child when his own heart felt broken beyond repair. The sadness that had clung to him for so long felt deeper than ever now, swirling around him like a dark cloud. He turned to Marianne, who was still standing in the doorway, waiting patiently, as if she knew exactly what was going through his mind. "I can't do this," Graham muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not the man for this. I don't know how to raise her." Marianne stepped forward, her eyes soft with understanding but firm with conviction. "Evelyn asked me to bring her to you," she said gently. "She knew you were the one who could give her a home. You're the only one who can. She deserves that much. This child deserves a chance." But Graham shook his head. The idea of raising Lily was foreign to him. As distant as the horizon he stared at every evening. She was a living reminder of everything he had lost, and he wasn't sure he could survive the pain of loving again, of opening his heart only to lose it all over again. He didn't know how to be a father, didn't know how to care for someone so small when he couldn't even care for himself. The ranch, the land, the animals, they were all he had left, and now this child, this tiny human being, was being thrust upon him uninvited. "I don't even know how to feed her," he said, his voice cracking. "How am I supposed to take care of a baby?" Marion gave him a sympathetic look, but didn't back down. "You don't have to know everything right away, Graham, but you have to try. For her. For Evelyn." This is what she wanted. Graham looked at her for a long moment, his heart aching with a confusion he couldn't put into words. He couldn't just send Marion away, not with Lily in her arms. But he also couldn't bring himself to accept her into his life. He was terrified of what that meant. The vulnerability, the love, the responsibility, it was too much to bear. And yet there she was. He couldn't deny the fact that he had no choice. When Marianne finally left, Graham stood still in the doorway, staring at the empty space where she had been. He looked down at Lily, who was now quiet, staring up at him with wide eyes that seemed to be waiting for something. He didn't know what to do. He had no idea how to care for her, how to love her. He didn't know the first thing about being a father. As the days passed, the challenge of fatherhood became clearer. Graham struggled with the basics, feeding the baby, changing her, even holding her properly. Every time Lily cried, his heart ached with helplessness. He felt as if he were stumbling in the dark, unsure of where to go or what to do. The ranch, once his sanctuary, now felt colder and more isolating than ever. The silence that had once been comforting now felt suffocating. The baby's cries, though small, filled every corner of the house, and Graham couldn't escape them. He couldn't escape her. Graham often found himself sitting by the fireplace, staring into the flames, his hands trembling as he tried to figure out how to make Lily stop crying. Her needs were simple, but they seemed so vast to him. She needed food, comfort, care, things he wasn't sure he was capable of providing. Every time he tried, it felt like he was failing her. The weight of her dependence on him felt crushing. He'd sit there for hours, talking to himself, questioning everything he thought he knew about life. Evelyn had always wanted children. She had dreamed of raising a family, of filling the house with the sounds of laughter and love. Graham could remember the quiet talks they had, where they'd imagine what it would be like to have a son or a daughter, watching them grow up on the ranch. But now those dreams felt like distant memories, fragile and broken. And yet here he was, holding Lily, a living, breathing reminder of everything they had once wanted. "Why now, Evelyn?" Graham would whisper in the stillness of the night. "Why didn't you tell me about her? Why didn't you let me prepare for this?" His heart felt heavy with grief, but it was mixed with something else too. Fear, uncertainty. He couldn't do this alone. He didn't want to. He couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was a test he wasn't ready to face. He had no experience with children, no clue how to care for a baby. And as he sat there, staring at the baby in his arms, it felt like he was trapped. The ranch, the life he had built, all seemed so far away now. Every decision he made seemed to be the wrong one. Every step he took felt uncertain. One night, after another long day of trying to care for Lily, Graham sat on the porch, his hands on his face, exhausted and defeated. Lily was asleep in her cradle inside, but the weight of her presence lingered, and he couldn't escape it. He had promised Evelyn he would take care of her, but how could he when he felt so unprepared, so broken? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice behind him. It was Marianne, returning from town with supplies. She saw the exhaustion on his face and quietly sat beside him. "You're doing the best you can, Graham," she said gently. "It's not easy, but you don't have to do it alone. The townspeople are here to help, and you have a community that cares for you both. Evelyn knew you could do it. She believed in you." Graham didn't answer right away. The words felt like a lifeline, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to reach for them yet. But as he looked out over the ranch, he realized she was right. He wasn't alone. Lily wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to be perfect. He didn't have to know everything. He just had to try. For Lily, for Evelyn, for the life that was still waiting for him to live. With a heavy sigh, Graham stood up and went back inside, determined to do his best. He didn't have all the answers, but he was ready to try. For Lily, for himself, for the memory of Evelyn. As the days stretched into weeks, Graham found himself beginning to soften, though he wasn't ready to admit it. Lily had a way of breaking through his walls. She was still so small, so fragile, yet her presence had started to change the rhythm of his life. He began to notice how she gazed up at him with wide eyes, her tiny hands reaching for him. Whenever he held her, she would coo softly, the sound like a quiet melody that seemed to echo through the empty house. It was almost as if she was calling him to step into a new life, one he hadn't known he needed. At first, Graham resisted. He was afraid to get too close. He couldn't let himself love her the way he had loved Evelyn. His heart was too afraid, too scarred. But as the days passed, something shifted. When Lily cried, his instinct was no longer to pull away. He would pick her up, rocking her gently in his arms, feeling her warmth against him. He started feeding her, changing her, doing the things a father was supposed to do. It felt foreign at first, but there was a quiet joy in it, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Sometimes, when the silence of the ranch was too much to bear, Graham would find himself humming softly, a lullaby that Evelyn used to sing to him. He hadn't realized how much he missed her voice until he heard himself singing it again, in a soft, tender whisper to Lily. These small moments of connection were subtle, but they were the first signs that Graham's heart was beginning to thaw. Lily had become his anchor, the one thing in his life that he could not ignore. As she grew, so did the bond between them. Every time he held her, there was a sense of something healing inside him, something that had been broken and locked away after Evelyn's death. The ranch no longer felt quite as cold. Her presence, however small, began to fill the house with a warmth that he hadn't realized it lacked. Lily was not just a reminder of what he had lost. She was a new chapter, a chance for something better. At night, as Lily slept peacefully in her cradle, Graham would sit by the fire, looking at the flames, lost in thought. He would talk to her, even though she was still too young to understand. He spoke about Evelyn, about their dreams and the plans they had made for their future together. He shared stories of their time before the illness, of how they used to laugh together on warm summer evenings, planning a life that now seemed so distant. He talked about the ranch, about how they had hoped to raise a family here, with children running through the fields, their laughter filling the air. Lily wasn't just his daughter. She was a living connection to Evelyn, a piece of her that he could hold on to. With each word, Graham felt a weight lifting from his heart, as if, through his stories, he was finally allowing himself to remember the good times without drowning in the pain. He no longer felt that the memory of Evelyn was something he had to bury. Instead, it became something he could share with Lily. He started to see her not just as a replacement for the family he had lost, but as the continuation of that dream, the dream Evelyn had once held so dearly. Through Lily, Graham was learning to heal. As the weeks passed, Lily's presence began to spread beyond the walls of the ranch. Word of her arrival reached the local town, and the townspeople, who had always respected Graham for his hard work and quiet strength, began to offer their support. At first, Graham resisted. He didn't want to ask for help, didn't want to feel like he owed anyone anything. He had always been the one who did everything on his own, the one who kept to himself, and he wasn't sure he was ready to change that. But the offers kept coming. Neighbors brought over baby supplies, food, and even help with the ranch. The blacksmith offered to fix the broken gate. The baker gave him a basket of fresh bread, and a woman from town dropped by with homemade clothes for Lily. Graham accepted the help reluctantly, still holding on to his pride, but each act of kindness chipped away at the walls he had built around himself. Slowly, he started to realize that he wasn't alone. The community wasn't just offering him help out of pity, they were offering it out of care. They respected him, admired him, and wanted to see him succeed. And for the first time in a long while, Graham allowed himself to lean on them, to accept the support they were offering. It wasn't easy. Graham had always been proud, and asking for help felt like a weakness. But with Lily in his life, he was learning that he didn't have to do everything alone. He didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had a family now, in a sense, Lily, the ranch, and the people who had reached out to him. It was a new kind of strength, one that wasn't about isolation, but about connection. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sunset, Lily in his arms, he realized that his life had changed in ways he hadn't expected. The sadness that had once seemed so overpowering was still there, but it wasn't all-consuming anymore. He had a purpose now. He had someone to care for. And as Lily gazed up at him, her tiny hands gripping his shirt, he felt a flicker of hope in his heart. Maybe this was the life he was meant to have, a life where love, even in its quietest forms, could heal even the deepest wounds. Graham's bond with Lily continued to grow, and with each passing day, he felt himself becoming more and more the father she needed. He wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and that was enough. The journey of fatherhood was never what he had imagined, but it was his now, and it was a journey that was slowly bringing him back to life. Through Lily, he was rediscovering the joy of living, of loving, and of dreaming again. He had once believed he had nothing left to give, but now, with the baby in his arms and the community by his side, he was learning that there was always more to give, more to share, and more to hope for. The walls around his heart had come down, piece by piece, and as he looked at Lily, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. The storm came suddenly, rolling in from the west with a fury Graham hadn't expected. Dark clouds gathered overhead, blocking out the sun, and the wind howled across the plains, rattling the windows of the ranch. Graham watched from the window as the sky darkened, feeling a knot tighten in his stomach. He had grown used to the quiet rhythms of ranch life, the steady work of caring for the land, the animals, and now Lily. But this storm felt different. It felt like a warning, a reminder that life could still be unpredictable and harsh, no matter how hard he tried to control it. The first sign of trouble came the next morning when Lily developed a fever. At first, Graham tried not to worry. She had been a healthy baby, and he reasoned that it was probably just a simple cold. But as the day went on, her condition worsened. Her small body trembled with chills, and her cries grew weaker. Graham felt a surge of panic rise in his chest. He wasn't equipped to handle this. He had no idea what to do. The ranch, the storm, and Lily's illness all seemed to collide at once, and he felt completely powerless. He paced the floors, holding Lily in his arms, trying to soothe her, but nothing seemed to work. The wind outside screamed against the walls of the house, but it was the silence inside that unsettled him the most. He had always prided himself on being strong and self-sufficient, but this was beyond him. He didn't know how to care for her when she was so small, so fragile, so dependent on him. He was overwhelmed by the weight of it all. The ranch needed him. The animals needed him. Lily needed him, and he didn't know if he could do it. As the storm raged on, Graham knew he couldn't do it alone anymore. His pride, which had kept him isolated for so long, started to crumble. He needed help. He needed someone who knew what they were doing, someone who could tell him what to do to save Lily. He had resisted asking for help for so long, but now, with his daughter's life hanging in the balance, he realized he had no choice. In desperation, he bundled Lily in a thick blanket and rode to town. The storm was fierce, but he had to reach the doctor. When he arrived at the small clinic, he found the door half open and the warmth of the fire inside inviting him to step out of the cold. Dr. Harrison, an older man with a calm presence, greeted him at the door. "I need help," Graham said, his voice tight with anxiety. "Lily's sick. I don't know what to do." Dr. Harrison's eyes softened as he took in the sight of Graham and the baby. "Let's take a look at her," he said, leading them inside. As Graham sat down with Lily in his arms, he noticed a familiar face. Mary Ann was sitting by the fire, waiting for the doctor. Her presence, though quiet, was a comfort. She had been a steady force in his life. Ever since that first night, she brought Lily to the ranch. "Graham, you're doing the best you can," Mary Ann said, her voice soft but steady. "This isn't easy, but you're here. You're doing what matters. You're showing up." Her words felt like a lifeline in the middle of his storm. Graham had always thought that being a father meant being perfect, knowing exactly what to do at every turn. But as he watched Dr. Harrison work, carefully examining Lily, he began to understand. No one was perfect. Not even the doctor had all the answers. The important thing was to keep trying, to keep showing up, no matter how hard it was. After a thorough examination, Dr. Harrison reassured him that Lily just had a bad cold. With some rest, fluids, and patience, she would be fine. But the doctor also gave him some advice on how to care for her when she was sick. Graham, still feeling the weight of his inadequacies, listened carefully, making sure to remember every word. It was a small comfort, but it was enough to ease his fears, at least for the moment. As they left the clinic, Mary Ann walked beside him, her presence calming. She had always been a kind of quiet support in his life, but today her words felt like more than just reassurance. "You're doing just fine, Graham," she said again, this time with a gentle smile. "You don't have to be perfect. No one is." Her words hung in the air as they walked back to the ranch, the storm still howling around them. Graham felt a sense of clarity settle over him, though it was still mixed with the overwhelming responsibility of fatherhood. He realized that his love for Lily was not about being perfect, not about always getting it right. It was about showing up, about doing the best he could, even when things seemed impossible. Back at the ranch, as Lily slept peacefully, Graham sat by the fire, his thoughts quiet. He looked at her, so small and vulnerable, and a deep love began to stir in him. One that was different from the love he had for Evelyn, but just as strong. It was a love that came from a place of understanding, of learning, and of accepting that he didn't have to have all the answers to be a good father. He didn't have to be perfect. He just had to be there for Lily, for himself, and for the life they would build together. In that moment, as he sat by the fire, something shifted inside him. The grief he had carried for so long was still there, but it no longer consumed him. He wasn't trying to replace Evelyn or relive the past. He was learning to love again, not as he had before, but in a way that was deeper, richer, and more complex than he had ever imagined. He was learning to love Lily, to care for her in a way that was all his own. The storm outside was still fierce, but inside the house, it felt warmer. Graham was beginning to understand that the love he had for Evelyn wasn't lost. It had been transformed, reshaped by the new life he was building with Lily. The past was always with him, but it no longer held him captive. He was ready to step forward, to be the father Lily needed. And as the storm raged outside, Graham finally felt like he was ready to face whatever came next. The storm had passed, leaving the ranch calm and clear. Graham stood outside, Lily in his arms, feeling the weight of the quiet peace that followed the storm. The sky was painted with soft colors of sunset, and for the first time in a long while, Graham felt at peace. The storm outside was over, but more importantly, he was beginning to accept the storm inside himself. He had spent so long resisting, unsure of his place as a father, but now he was starting to embrace it. With each passing day, Graham grew more involved with Lily. He played with her, talked to her, and began teaching her about the things Evelyn used to love. Lily's laughter filled the house, making it feel alive again. Graham sang the lullabies Evelyn used to hum. Feeling the love he had lost begin to take a new shape in his heart. He was becoming the father Lily needed, and the ranch was slowly turning into the home he had once dreamed with Evelyn. The balance between his responsibilities as a rancher and a father wasn't easy, but felt right. The ranch, which had once felt cold and empty, now felt like a place full of purpose. Graham no longer saw his work as a burden, but as something he was doing for Lily and the family he was building. One evening, after a long day of work, Graham stood outside, looking at the sunset. For the first time since Evelyn's death, he felt a deep connection to the land, the memory of his wife, and the new life he was creating with Lily. The grief was still there, but it no longer controlled him. Lily had given him a new sense of purpose, and he realized that he was ready to move forward. The past would always be a part of him, but now he was living for the future. With Lily in his arms, he felt ready for whatever came next, knowing that, together, they could face anything. The day arrived when the ranch, once quiet and isolated, was filled with life. The townspeople had gathered to celebrate the small family that had formed here. Graham had always kept to himself, but now, with Lily in his arms, he found himself surrounded by the warmth and kindness of those who had quietly supported him from the start. The people who had once offered him help, from the blacksmith to the baker, now stood together, smiling and chatting as they brought gifts and food to the ranch. The house, once cold and barren, was now a home, alive with laughter and conversation. The ranch felt different. It felt like it belonged to something more than just Graham. It belonged to the community, to Lily, and to the family he had started to rebuild. Graham stood back for a moment, watching the celebration unfold. His heart was full as he reflected on how far he had come. Just a few months ago, he had been a man lost in grief, unsure of how to move forward. But now, he was a father, no longer simply surviving, but living. He had learned that love wasn't just something that came easily. It was something you worked for, something you chose to give, even when it felt impossible. He had learned to embrace both the joy and the pain that came with loving someone fully. Lily was no longer just a reminder of loss. She was a symbol of new beginnings, of all the possibilities that still lay ahead. She had brought him healing, and through her, he had rediscovered a capacity for joy he had thought was lost forever. As the night wore on and the celebration continued, Graham felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. He looked around at the people gathered in his home, at Lily in his arms, and he realized he was no longer alone. He had once believed that the ranch was his place of solitude, but now it felt like his place of belonging. Mary Ann, who had been his quiet guide, was standing nearby, her gentle presence a reminder of how much he had grown. The townspeople, once strangers, now felt like family. And Lily, his daughter, was the heart of it all. The final scene unfolded as the celebration continued into the evening. Graham stood next to the crib, looking down at Lily as she slept peacefully. The room was filled with the hum of laughter and the soft clinking of glasses. People were sharing stories, exchanging jokes, and enjoying the warmth of being together. Graham smiled as he gazed at his daughter, knowing that she was the reason this new chapter of his life had begun. He never imagined this life, one filled with joy, with love, with people who cared for him. But here he was, standing in the middle of it, a father, a part of something greater than himself. The wind still howled across the plains, but inside the house, laughter echoed, a sound stronger than any storm, a sound that would carry on for years to come.